Now, if we look at all life on Earth, we see that there's so much of it, so much biodiversity. It's just astonishing, millions and millions of species. So as scientists, we like to classify all the different living things into groups so that we can know how they're related and how they're similar and how they're different to each other as we study them. And so scientists have grouped all living things on Earth into 5 kingdoms of life. And the 5 kingdoms of life are, the first one that you and me are a part of is Animalia. So this is where basically the animals, so a tiger's one, but a human's one. So animals are basically organisms which consume or eat food. So, I regularly eat breakfast, lunch and dinner. Tigers eat, not me hopefully, but they do eat things. So animals eat things to get their food. Another type of, one of the kingdoms of life is Plantae. So here's some grass here, but all grasses, plants, trees, shrubs, kelp in the ocean, they're all types of plants. And plants actually make their own food via a process called photosynthesis. So plants make their own food, they don't have to kind of consume it. So that's a different kingdom again. In the middle here, we've got Monera, or prokaryotes, basically. So it's these single-celled, unicellular, just bacteria. So everything in Monera, it's just a single-celled bacteria. They're very basic prokaryotic cells, and that's basically what distinguishes them from the rest, because while Kingdom Monera is prokaryotic cells, all the other kingdoms are made up of eukaryotic cells. So Animalia, eukaryotic cells, Plantae, eukaryotic cells, and the other two, fungi and protists, are also eukaryotic cells. So we've got fungi here. This is one of the other kingdoms of life. This is a mushroom here, but it's mushrooms and some molds and yeasts and things like that. And so these organisms actually absorb food from their surroundings. Sometimes they excrete digestive juices onto their food, so it kind of breaks down, and then they just kind of absorb the food into their bodies, which is pretty cool. And the last group of organisms, which is the protists here, so these organisms are basically organisms which don't fit anywhere else. So some of them are photosynthetic, some of them are not, some of them are multicellular, some of them are unicellular. They're a bit kind of there, they just don't fit in the other 4 groups. But those are the 5 kingdoms of life. Animalia, here, Plantae, Monera, fungi, and protists. So they're the 5 kingdoms of life. If we look down here, we can see the way that kind of they're classified. So if we think of, we've got all organisms on Earth, every single living thing, then if you split them straight away, some of them are prokaryotic or prokaryotes, and some living things on Earth are eukaryotic. So the prokaryotes, they're unicellular organisms, and that is Kingdom Monera. So that's one kingdom right there. Eukaryotics, they can also be unicellular, and if a eukaryotic cell is unicellular, it's pretty much a protist, protista, but they're actually a bit kind of different, lots of these cells. But there we go, there's a second group. So Monera and protists here. But if we continue to split, this is called a dichotomous key, where every time there's 2 choices, di is kind of 2. So some eukaryotic cells are multicellular. And if we follow this chain, some of them do not have a cell wall. So animal cells don't have a cell wall. So that's us. Our cells don't have a cell wall. So we got Monera, protists, Animalia, so 3 kingdoms. And then, of course, there's the multicellular organisms who do have a cell wall. Some of them don't perform photosynthesis, and that is the kingdom fungi. Some eukaryotic cells, which are multicellular, which have a cell wall and are able to perform photosynthesis, are the plants. And so that is the 5 kingdoms of life, and you can see there some of the differences between all the kingdoms, whether they're prokaryotic or eukaryotic, unicellular, multicellular, don't have a cell wall, do have a cell wall, don't perform photosynthesis, or do perform photosynthesis. So they're the 5 kingdoms of life. But if we think of all life, we can actually classify it a little bit differently to that even. So we can classify all life, more than just 5 kingdoms, we can go down and down and down the chain. So life can be classified into, this is all life, but then you can have 3 domains of life, and then you can have the 5 kingdoms we talked about, And then you can have a phylum, a class, an order, a family, a genus, and a species. And to give you a bit of an idea, I mean, I'm a genus Homo, and my species is Homo sapiens. So I'm life, my domain is eukaryotic, my kingdom is Animalia, my phylum is Chordata, my class is Mammalia, I think I'm a primate, and it goes down here to Homo sapiens. So this is how we classify all living things on Earth. But in terms of the domains of living things, and we follow this over here, the domains of living things are basically, there's 3 of them. So there's bacteria, so these are unicellular prokaryotic cells. There's archaea, these are also unicellular prokaryotic cells. They're just kind of very, we would look at them and think they're very same. There's one cell, they're very small, prokaryotic, but these are kind of older and a little bit stranger, these archaea bacteria, the normal bacteria. And then there's eukaryotes. So this is the fungi, the animals, the plants, the molds, all those kinds of things are here. So this is kind of everything else that you think about when you're thinking of living things. So these are the 3 domains of life. And in fact, just one little thing is when we look at these 3 domains, we can see why some scientists choose to classify bacteria, classify all life, according to 6 kingdoms of life. So some scientists like to say that there are 6 kingdoms of life. There are the protists, there's the fungi, there's the plants, there's the animals, and there's not Monera, but there is archaebacteria and eubacteria, so kind of newer bacteria and older bacteria. So sometimes scientists say there's 6 kingdoms of life. We generally say there's 5. So that's all about the 5 kingdoms of life, how they're different, and a little bit about the classification of all living things on Earth.